A white bloom is nestled among green leaves beside the columned and curved south portico of the White House.
It is made of stone, marble, and wood. A place of symbol and ceremony, where the work of democracy goes on and where momentous decisions are made. It is a home where the seasonal rites of family life take place and a living museum filled with fine art treasures and open to all.
A group of young people file through the Blue Room,
reflecting the unfolding drama of our nation's story. It is the White House.
Titles: Where History Lives, a tour of the White House. Next, video excerpts. President Wilson grinning in top hat and tails as he exits the White House. President Eisenhower accompanying a young Queen Elizabeth up outside steps as bulbs flash. President Kennedy in a padded rocking chair chatting with Soviet leaders. President Truman signing papers. And outside the White House, President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill seated next to each other. Over these images, credits, a presentation of the White House Historical Association, produced, written, and directed by Peter Argentine, editor David Cohen, narrator Stanley Anderson, music composed by Todd Hayen, performed by the President's own United States Marine Band. Now, First Lady Michelle Obama.
Welcome to the White House. Originally called the President's House, the White House has since opened its doors and become the People's House, and a focal point of national pride. Barack and I and the girls are so proud to be caretakers during our time here. I'm joining you today from the Blue Room, which has become my favorite room on the state floor. The day after the inauguration, we hosted an open house and greeted visitors in this room. Seeing so many of our fellow Americans lining up to meet us and sharing that historical day with them will always be one of my favorite memories as First Lady.
The Obamas greet visitors.
Since then, we continue to do most of our entertaining here under the watchful gaze of Presidents Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, the first 4 residents of the White House. During the holiday season, the White House Christmas tree will be showcased in this beautiful window that overlooks the South Lawn, where presidents and their families have relaxed and played. We now have a swing set on the lawn for our girls that can be seen from right here and from the Oval Office. And that's what I find so special about the White House. While the history of our nation is embedded in the furnishings and the works of art that are displayed throughout this house, every day the next chapters of our nation's great story are written in these rooms and on these grounds. This is where history lives. I hope you enjoy this look inside.
She smiles. Next, a bust of George Washington.
It was the leader of a new nation, George Washington, who selected the site in 1791 for what was to become known as the President's House. In an open competition, Washington chose Irish-born architect James Hoban and hired him to supervise the construction of the winning design. While Washington maintained great interest in the building's progress, he died before it was completed.
A painting of the mansion amid scaffolding.
In 1800, when President John Adams and his wife Abigail finally moved in, they found a cold, damp building still under construction, with only a few rooms finished.
A painting, Mrs. Adams with laundry hanging in the White House.
Like democracy itself, the White House has always been a work in progress, evolving with the nation. President Thomas Jefferson, an amateur architect, made the first additions to the house in 1808, constructing colonnades on both sides of the house to conceal storage space and stables. As the home of the president and a treasured symbol of our nation, the White House has endured moments of peril throughout its history.
A painting, flames billow from windows of the White House surrounded by British redcoats.
During the War of 1812, British troops set fire to the house, destroying the interior and its furnishings. But the charred walls defiantly remained. The house would be rebuilt, once again under the guidance of architect James Hoban.
Curved stairways lead to the south entrance.
Shortly after the rebuilding was completed, a new columned portico on the south was added during the term of President James Monroe. 2 administrations later, President Andrew Jackson built a second portico to the north as a means of providing shelter to arriving guests.
Rectangular with 10 columns.
As with every home, the White House has been modified for new technologies, adding running water in 1833 and gas lighting in 1848.
4 men recline in a bathtub.
As well as increasingly sophisticated communications equipment, from the establishment of a telegraph room in 1866 to fiber optic connections for the nation's media today.
Behind a panel, knobs labeled by news service.
While the historic structure of the White House is constantly adapted, there have been times when more than a slight modification was needed.
Exposed floorboards.
When President Truman's family piano broke through a floor joist in 1948, it became obvious that the building's wood framework could no longer support its weight. During the more than 3 years of reconstruction, the main floors of the White House were methodically dismantled.
The interior of the White House is gutted, walls supported by steel struts.
An entire bulldozer was disassembled and rebuilt inside the structure. Hundreds of workers excavated a new 2-story basement, laid new foundations, and rebuilt the interior with modern material.
A headline, President makes tour of renovated mansion.
President Truman returned in 1952 and proudly showed the White House renovations on a live television broadcast.
Now this is the state dining room, and we can seat 102 people here.
It was the first time a mass audience got a look inside the White House.
Incidentally, it was in the family dining room where the piano nearly came through the ceiling. Is that right?
It did come through.
In 1962, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy hosted a new tour of the White House, this time as part of a campaign to provide a sense of the nation's history in the rooms and their furnishings.
So important, the setting in which the presidency is presented to the world.
A fire blazes in the Red Room fireplace. Now an aerial view of the People's House.
Today, the White House is situated on 18 acres of gardens and grounds and has 132 rooms.
A graphic cutaway of the building.
The ground floor includes the diplomatic reception room, library, and a variety of other reception rooms, as well as the main kitchen. The first floor has the most famous rooms: the entrance hall, East Room, Green, Blue, and Red Rooms, and the State Dining Room. The second floor is the private residence of the President and the location of the Lincoln Bedroom. The third floor has additional private rooms, including a solarium atop the south portico, a favorite of President's families.
A helicopter lands. The Washington Monument looms in the background.
When Marine One, the President's helicopter, lands on the South Lawn, the President and the First Lady enter the house through the ground floor diplomatic reception room.
An oval room with muraled walls.
Ambassadors and foreign guests are often greeted here, but it was once the boiler and furnace room. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's fireside chats took place in this room.
This is a talk on national security.
The nearby map room, now a sitting room, was used by President Roosevelt to track troop and ship movements during World War II. Security was so tight that his Secret Service agents had to wait outside the door.
The door closes.
The ground floor corridor was a damp basement cluttered with pipes and ducts before its renovation in 1902. On one end, it leads to the colonnade, the famed passageway linking the President's house to the West Wing offices.
A manicured garden abuts the columned corridor.
During the 19th century, administrative offices were located just beside the family quarters of the President. With working space and privacy for the first family lacking, some suggested that the White House had outlived its usefulness and should simply be abandoned, while others created plans and architectural models for a dramatic enlargement of the building. Standing in the way of expansion of the west side of the house was a vast array of greenhouses. "Smash the glass houses," ordered Teddy Roosevelt. and a new West Wing was created for the president and his staff. The first president to use an Oval Office in the West Wing was William Howard Taft in 1909.
The mustachioed and heavy-set Taft studies papers.
Each president puts his own personal touch on the furnishings of the Oval Office. This desk was made from the oak timbers of the British ship Resolute, rescued from the Arctic ice by an American ship. It has been used by 22 presidents since Queen Victoria presented it to President Hayes in 1880.
The Great Seal's eagle carved in front.
The Oval Office and its furnishings convey the historic legacy of the presidency. However, the West Wing is not only for business. A bowling alley was constructed in the basement in 1947 for President Truman, followed by a later one designed for President Nixon underneath the north portico.
Nixon bowls.
It's a favorite of presidential grandchildren. An indoor swimming pool built for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the terrace between the residence and the West Wing was converted by President Nixon into the White House press room.
Members of the media pack the space.
Foreign heads of state are greeted by the President and First Lady outside the North Portico, where they pause for a photo opportunity.
George and Laura Bush with the President of Mexico and his wife.
Inside the North Portico is the entrance hall.
A red-carpeted hall lined by marble columns at right, a chandelier hangs over diamond-shaped marble tiles at center.
The grand staircase is one of the most photographed places in the White House.
A wide, red-carpeted stair.
Prior to state dinners, presidents, first ladies, and their guests descend here and pause for the press as the Marine Band plays Hail to the Chief, an old Scottish anthem.
President and Mrs. Bush and President and Mrs. Fox, 2001. Next, President and Mrs. Reagan and Prime Minister and Mr. Thatcher, 1987. President and Mrs. Clinton and President and Mrs. Mandela, 1994.
Majestic marble columns line the cross hall, which leads to the largest room of the mansion. Designed by Hoban as the public audience room, it is the East Room.
3 crystal chandeliers adorn the room.
Befitting the splendor of the room is a concert grand piano especially designed for the White House and manufactured by Steinway in 1938. It features 5 gilt scenes of music unique to America.
2 pairs of square dancers with a fiddler, a folk dancer at a cactus. Native Americans sing and move in a circle.
Supported by gilded mahogany eagles, the piano is part of the rich musical history of the White House. In the East Room is the White House's most prized treasure, a portrait of George Washington by Gilbert Stuart. During the War of 1812, First Lady Dolly Madison bravely refused to flee the approaching British troops until the portrait was removed to safety. Spared from the British torches, it is the only object that has remained in the White House collection since 1800.
Washington's right arm is extended.
7 of the 8 presidents who have died while in office have lain in state in the East Room, including President Abraham Lincoln, Warren G. Harding, and John F. Kennedy.
A color photo of Kennedy's casket being placed in the East Room.
A grand and memorable space, embellished somewhat in size by this artist, the East Room is more often a place of celebration. Ulysses S. Grant's daughter Nellie was married here in 1874. Nearly a century later, President Lyndon B. Johnson's daughter Linda was also married here.
Video of Lyndon Johnson, her groom, and the minister.
The East Room has been the setting for a long legacy of White House performances.
Harlem Boys Choir, 1991.
As well as for the presentation of awards.
Medal of Honor, 1945.
And the signing of treaties.
Civil Rights Act, 1964. Then George H.W. Bush with Mikhail Gorbachev. United States-Soviet Union bilateral agreements, 1990.
3 smaller reception rooms in the center of the state floor are furnished in styles popular during the years of our earliest presidents. The Green Room is finished in the federal style, named for the beginning years of our government under the Constitution. President Jefferson used it as his dining room, while President Monroe used the room for playing cards. But throughout most of its history, the green room has been a parlor for small teas and receptions. Most of the early 19th century mahogany furniture in the green room was handcrafted in the shop of one of America's finest cabinet makers, Duncan Phyfe of New York. A variety of hidden compartments in this table open to reveal storage areas and working surfaces for fine sewing or the painting of miniatures. This silver-plated coffee urn was prized by President John Adams, who may have purchased it in London, where he served as America's first minister to Great Britain. Abigail Adams viewed England as the source of all things elegant. Above the mantel hangs a portrait of Benjamin Franklin by David Martin. It was commissioned by a merchant in whose favor Franklin had settled a dispute. The paintings in the green room depict a broad spectrum of American art.
Titles: Lighter Revealing a Steamboat Aground by George Caleb Bingham. Independence Hall in Philadelphia by Ferdinand Rickert. The Mosquito Net by John Singer Sargent. Sand Dunes at Sunset, Atlantic City by Henry Ossawa Tanner. And The Builders by Jacob Lawrence.
Altogether, there are more than 500 works of fine art in the White House collection, many by major American artists.
An oval mirror reflects the green room interior.
The oval blue room is the most formal and elegant of the White House reception rooms. George Washington had been especially fond of an oval-shaped room in his presidential residence in Philadelphia. The unusual curved windows of the blue room frame an expansive view of the South grounds, Washington Monument, and the Jefferson Memorial. Known as the Oval Room until President Martin Van Buren had the furniture and draperies done in blue, presidents and first ladies have held formal White House receptions here throughout its history.
A painting, President Theodore Roosevelt greets formally dressed guests.
The Blue Room is decorated in the French style of Napoleon, called Empire, chosen by President James Monroe in 1817 after the White House was rebuilt. These gilded furnishings are some of the most important antiques in America.
A gold eagle imprinted in the blue fabric of a chair.
This pair of porcelain vases feature painted scenes of Passy, France, where Benjamin Franklin lived while American minister.
A man on foot leads a horseman on a path near a cluster of buildings in the distance. Now through a door in the blue room to the red room.
The Red Room is decorated in the American Empire style from the period between 1810 and 1830. The furniture features carving influenced by Egyptian and Greek design.
Golden carved wings of a sphinx-like creature with a woman's face support a table.
French-born cabinet maker Charles-Honoré Lanouillet created this masterpiece in his New York workshop. It features inlaid marble in a pattern that appears three-dimensional, known as trompe-l'oeil, or trick of the eye.
Diamond-shaped designs.
In the 19th century, White House families and their guests used the room for musical performances, but it has always been a favorite of first ladies for receiving guests.
Nancy Reagan and Reza Gorbachev, 1987.
Many of the White House rooms have served a variety of purposes over time, including the state dining room. Originally a much smaller space, it served as Thomas Jefferson's office, where the famed Lewis and Clark expedition was planned. A staircase in the adjacent hallway was removed in 1902, greatly enlarging the state dining room.
An antlered animal head hangs from the wall at one end of the room.
Theodore Roosevelt decorated the room with big game heads, purchased from a New York store. Woodrow Wilson's wife found them gruesome, and they were later removed. This mantel is a reproduction in marble of the original designed for President Theodore Roosevelt. It initially featured carved lions, but Roosevelt ordered them changed. Bison, he said, were much more American.
A carved bison in profile.
On the mantel is an inscription from a letter written by President John Adams to his wife Abigail on his second night in the White House. I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. Since 1874, formal state dinners have been held in the state dining room. As many as 140 guests can be seated here.
A wine glass sparkles.
Each elegant place setting includes gilded silver flatware and the distinctive White House china.
An eagle against clouds decorates a plate.
The White House china collection represents the aesthetic tastes of many administrations. James Monroe's 1817 service featured an American eagle, a common motif.
President Abraham Lincoln, a red border with an eagle at center. President Benjamin Harrison, a blue and gold border with an eagle atop a red and white shield. President James K. Polk, a white service with gold trim and an eagle and shield at top. President Ronald Reagan, a red and gold border and rim with the presidential seal eagle at center.
Lady Bird Johnson selected a border of wild flowers, while President and Mrs. Hayes' unusual setting proudly displayed American plants and animals.
A dark crab with open claws is depicted on a border.
Hidden behind the formal walls, one floor below the state dining room, the meals for state dinners are created in a compact kitchen.
Chefs in tall white hats. Flames flare from a large pan monitored by a chef.
In very tight quarters, the White House pastry team creates elaborate desserts relating to the event taking place.
There you go. Don't I look cute?
He holds an edible flower at his ear.
The pastry chef works magic with blown and pulled sugar.
Now a varied arrangement of blossoms.
With flowers as their palette, staff designers in the floral shop produce arrangements inspired by the country of the visiting head of state.
The state dining room with table settings and centerpieces in place.
A team of floral designers furnishes the White House with exquisite floral arrangements year-round.
A large bouquet of purple, pink, and white blossoms. Next, a bowl overflows with white roses.
Beside the state dining room is the family dining room, normally used for working luncheons and dinners by the president. It is transformed during a state dinner into a whirlwind of activity.
Waiters prepare desserts on plates and trays.
After all of the preparations have been made, and with much anticipation, the dinner finally takes place.
Guests in black tie and evening gowns crowd the state dining room.
For guests, the evening's menu serves as a tangible link to a memorable night.
The menus are printed in gold on white stock. Next, the South Portico at night.
While the White House must serve the needs of state visits, social events, and the workings of government, it is also a home, a place where family traditions are carried on.
President Kennedy claps for his two youngsters in the Oval Office. President Carter shares a moment with daughter Amy. President Obama hugs his daughters Malia and Sasha. President George H.W. Bush with two grandchildren. And President Clinton at his desk in the Oval Office while daughter Chelsea lifts her cat's socks in the air. Next, President and Mrs. Ford with their feet up.
The family living quarters are located on the second and third floors of the White House. At its center and directly above the Blue Room is the Yellow Oval Room. The first White House Christmas tree was displayed here by President Benjamin Harrison in 1889. A tradition that has been continued by many presidential families.
President Lyndon Johnson and his family pose in front of their Christmas tree.
The room is used by the President and First Lady for receiving heads of state and other guests before a state dinner. Outside the Yellow Oval Room is the Truman Balcony, a favorite place of many presidential families to relax and to entertain.
The Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial in the distance.
The nearby Lincoln bedroom was never used as such by Lincoln himself. It was his office and cabinet room. Maps tracing the course of the war once covered the room's walls. This delicate coverlet was crocheted by Grace Coolidge for the Lincoln bed. She hoped to begin a tradition of First Ladies leaving mementos of their family life.
The words, "The President's House," are crocheted within.
In this room, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. A rare copy of the Gettysburg Address in Lincoln's own hand can be found here.
Abraham Lincoln's signature.
Across the hall, the Queen's bedroom was given its name due to the many royal guests who stayed here. Heads of state often slept at the White House until one evening when Winston Churchill woke Mrs. Roosevelt seeking to continue a late-night discussion with her husband. Thereafter, foreign dignitaries stayed across the street at Blair House.
A wide building with a row of steps to its entrance.
The Treaty Room, now the President's personal office, was used as the Cabinet Room and President's office until the construction of the West Wing in 1902. This table was used by President Grant and has locking drawers designed for each member of his cabinet. The same table was later used on the North grounds for the signing of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel in 1979.
In color video, Anwar Sadat, Jimmy Carter, and Menachem Begin are seated at the table before a crowd.
For all who work and live in the White House, there is always the knowledge that it is a temporary home, and that one day the time will come to depart.
Presidents Coolidge and Hoover stand beside each other.
As each president transfers his power to a new administration, he leaves behind a legacy. The House remains an enduring symbol of our nation, of freedom, and of democracy.
So when we have, as we do today, Grant's table, Lincoln's bed, Monroe's gold set, all these make these men much more alive. So I think it makes the White House a stronger panorama, really, of our great story.
The north entrance to the White House, a fountain circled by red flowers in the foreground. Next, President Obama.
The White House is in many ways an enduring monument to the resilience and vitality of our democracy. Each of its rooms and every object within them has a story to tell about the presidents and families who came before us and the history they made. Those who have lived and worked in this place have had many different values, beliefs, and visions, but they were all here for the same purpose: to ensure that the words of our founders, put to paper more than 2 centuries ago, would mean something for all our people, and to do their part to further the work of perfecting our union. Michelle and I are eager to welcome our fellow citizens to the White House, and we hope you will share what you've learned today with your families and communities back home. Because in the end, we're only guests here. This house truly belongs to you, the American people. We are awed by and grateful for the chance to reside here, and I am humbled by the chance to work here and proud to serve this great nation that I love so much.
Against an aerial night view of the north portico of the White House, credits appear, including Associate Producer Diane Resnick, Production Manager Amanda Kvortek, Post-Production Manager Matt Conrad. Copyright White House Historical Association 2009. All rights reserved. In a black and white engraving, the White House as seen from the northwest and the words White House Historical Association. Now, a blue and white three-dimensional triangle, Argentine Productions.